When we're talking about naming of any type of compound, we're talking about a special term called nomenclature. For this particular video, we're going to focus on the nomenclature behind naming ionic compounds. Remember that an ionic compound contains a cation followed by an anion. Typically, your cations are going to be metals, and your anions could take one of two forms. They could either be nonmetals, or they could be polyatomic ions. The rules for naming ionic compounds are over here at the right. First thing we're always going to do is we're going to name the cation, and then we're going to follow that with the name of the anion. For monatomic cations, we're simply going to use the element name. For monatomic anions, we're going to drop the end of the name and replace it with IDE. So for example, if I had the ionic compound NaF, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to name the cation, sodium. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to name the anion, fluorine, but then we're going to drop the ending, INE, and replace it with IDE. NaF would take the name sodium fluoride. When we're talking about transition metals, we're talking about something that can take multiple charges. Because the transition metals can take one of multiple charges, we must specify that using either Roman numerals or the ik and the us. One such example that we can look at would be CuO. Now based on this right here, we know that oxygen takes a -2 charge, therefore this copper takes a +2 charge. Because copper can be either +1 or +2, we need to specify it with the name. So we would say this is copper Roman numeral 2 oxide. This is the newer way of naming things that can have multiple charges. The older way would be to take the Latin root, and for copper it's just CuPr, and because this is the larger of the two charges, we call it cupric oxide. We'll talk about this one in class and provide several examples on the board. The last thing that you have to do when you're talking about naming of ionics is if there's a polyatomic ion present, we don't change the ending of it whatsoever. If a polyatomic ion is present, we simply name the polyatomic ion. So for example, if we had NaClO2, we would name the cation, sodium, and then we would name the full polyatomic ion. ClO2 is the polyatomic ion chlorite. NaClO2 is sodium chloride. So here's a couple other examples that we'll try and name at this point. Using the rules that we just discussed, take a moment and try and answer these questions. Name these compounds. I'll give you about 15 seconds to try and name each one. Go ahead and attempt the first one now. Hopefully you were able to come up with a name of sodium sulfide. Take about 15 seconds now and try and solve the bottom one. Though it looks complex, we don't use any prefixes here, and we simply name the cation followed by the name of the anion. Hopefully you're able to come up with the name magnesium, which is the cation, phosphate, the anion. We'll learn how to put these compounds together in class, but naming them is the essential first step. Be prepared tomorrow to be able to name a couple very simple compounds.